Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Alazouzi from easymedicaldevice.com, and today we will talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and mainly specifically how you can submit your software as medical device that contains artificial intelligence and machine learning the right way to the authorities or to the regulators. And for that, I have with me Richie Christian from Vega. So Richie, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Manir.
Great. So, Rishi, can you tell us more about you first, and then we can start to help the audience to understand more about how to submit a software as medical device for authorities?
Yes, for sure. Well, my name is Richie, and currently I work at Vega as a medical device consultant. Before this, I was actually based in Auckland, New Zealand for a number of years, where I spent close to 10 years in the medical device industry, working on a lot of aspects, across quality and regulatory for global markets. My most recent experience was in New Zealand was with a medtech startup where we developed an AI ML based software as a medical device product, for which I was involved in building a QMS per 13485 and also MDSAP, and also I worked on getting this product cleared through the FDA. So my background has been traditional medical devices in the beginning, and then slowly it has evolved into more on the software side of things. Yeah, I would say I'm not an AI expert by any means, but I'm definitely passionate about how these new cool technologies are being used in the healthcare setting and how it intersects with quality systems and regulatory affairs as a whole.
Exactly, yeah. And for the story, so we met a few weeks ago, if I remember, because you are also in Basel, so you are just close to us. We could have done that in one room, if I can say this podcast, but it's better to do it in the two separate screens. But yeah, we met recently, so it was really great to meet you and to discuss with you. And you told me that mainly you were being able to come to Basel because also you listened to the podcast and you were able to meet with the discuss with the Vega people, and it's why maybe you had this opportunity also to come.
Yes, absolutely. I think this was an interesting story how I ended up moving from New Zealand to Switzerland. And my colleague Christoph Girardet, he was on the podcast a few times, and through your podcast, we connected together and explored how we might be able to work together. And here I am, many months later in Basel, being able to meet someone like you, have lunch with you, and have very interesting conversations about quality regulatory.
Great. I'm really happy of that and really proud of like making people connecting from so far, because Auckland, yeah, is really the other side of the planet. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's really
I would
great.
say, I'm a long time listener of your podcast, and your podcast, this proves it has a wide reach globally.
Exactly. So I'm really, yeah, I was astonished about that. So it's why I wanted to say that during this episode. So thanks again for this. Okay, let's turn back now to the topic. So as we said, so we are targeting here people that are trying to submit some software as medical device that contains some artificial intelligence or machine learning. Maybe before we go through how to submit, can we try to explain in layman words or for a 5 years old kid, if I can say, what is artificial intelligence and machine learning, hoping they will understand even if, yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a 4.5-year-old son. So when, thinking about explaining these concepts to kids, I really imagine myself explaining it to my 4.5-year-old son. And the way I would explain it is, the ability for a computer to really think and learn, that thinking and learning part is commonly what we associate with humans being intelligent. So I think, a 5-year-old would really understand a computer being able to think and learn, but also do things without a human telling it to do. So I think that those concepts hopefully would explain, artificial intelligence. And machine learning is more of a branch of AI where how computers learn and make decisions without humans telling them what to do. And I have an 8-month-old daughter, and it's really interesting to see how an 8-month-old would learn to do things. For example, in our living room, we have this glass coffee table,
Yeah.
and it has these glass sides. And when we first moved into this apartment, she would keep bumping into this glass side, trying to grab the toy that was on the other side. And, that happened a few times, a few bumps, a few cries. And, after 7, 8 times, maybe she figured out, there's actually a barrier in the middle, even though she can see the other side. And quickly she learned, she recognized these patterns and she learned over time. And then she would turn around the glass pane and grab the toy. So really this kind of thinking and learning that we see, little babies do is how I would explain machine learning to a 5-year-old.
Unearth the pulse of the medtech world with MedTech Conf, a dynamic platform featuring global events on medical devices, biologicals, IVD, and pharmaceuticals. Stay informed, stay ahead, connect, share, and elevate your knowledge. Become an official sponsor. Make your event shine on the map. MedTech Conf, your key to the medtech universe. Remember, the future is now, and it's at your fingertips with MedTech Conf.
Great. No, I think it's a great example with your child doing that, because yes, exactly that. Even the software will bump if I can sense some barriers, and at the end he has to find a way. So he tries many solutions and until he finds maybe the right solution here. But no, I think it's a great example here. Okay, so you have experience of submitting some software as medical device with artificial intelligence and machine learning to some regulators. So what are some elements that the audience that maybe plans to also do that should take into account before they are submitting these kind of products to the regulators?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I was involved in my past experience. And when we think about AI ML-based software as a medical device, there's a lot more than just the AI part that goes into the device. So even though this is what we are talking about today, there are things like software documentation, how you build your software, your requirements, traceability, risk management. Those are just as important as the things we're going to talk about. Then obviously cybersecurity is a big area right now. How do you secure your device from threats and attacks? So cybersecurity is important, and obviously risk management is important. But when we come to this topic of AI and the aspects we're going to touch on today, all of these things together, cybersecurity, software, risk management, and AI ML aspects, when you have them covered off well in your design history files, in your submissions, this is what's really going to dictate the success of your submission. I would also say, for the likes of FDA, having an interaction with them is really important. So you are testing the waters before you actually put your 510(k) through to the agency for review. So making sure that going into a submission, you're well aware. If you have the ability to figure out what the regulators are really expecting, that's really going to drive the success.
So here when we say talking with the regulator, so FDA, it's possible maybe to have a pre-submission like a Q-sub with them. For notified bodies, it may be a bit more difficult, but having some understanding of all that is really important. So I suppose also with FDA and also now with a lot of other agencies, they are issuing a lot of guidances also. They are issuing some documents to say, here is what maybe you should do or what you should consider. Be careful of this, be careful. So there are a lot of things. Recently, there was the US, Canada, and UK that issued a document about the guideline principles for AI ML machines. So they are also more and more issuing some guidelines. So you have maybe also to take into account those kind of things.
Yes, absolutely. And then last week, the FDA, Health Canada, and MHRA from the UK, they released another document outlining guidelines for transparency. So the regulators are providing all the guidelines and different guidances, but it's always encouraged that you ask them about specific topics related to your device and your strategy and your plan of approaching design and development and testing some of these systems.
So you have listed, you have given me a list of the elements that mainly we should look at. I mean, I suppose it's the thing that the pitfalls, if I can say, or the issues that mainly a lot of manufacturers are missing. So the first one, you said that it's a general overview of the clinical workflow and the device output. So can you explain us that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess this is, important for any medical device for a regulator to understand how this device actually works and what it does. But in terms of these AI ML devices, and a lot of things, sort of we talk about the black box nature of it. Many times it's not clear from the outset what this device actually does and how does it fit into the clinical workflow. So when we talk about these aspects, we talk about clearly describing what the clinical workflow is, where this device would fit under. For example, if this device is being used in surgery, is it being used preoperatively? Is it being used intraoperatively? Or is it being used postoperatively? Or, for example, is it really an aid to the clinician? Or does it actually replace clinical decision-making, clinician decision-making? So there are all of these scenarios in which these types of devices fall under, and it's really important to tell the reviewers and the regulators, in the software description, for example, to say, okay, this is the end-to-end clinical workflow, and this is where our device fits in, and this is exactly what it attempts to do in that workflow.
So here, for the regulators, the idea is that you have to describe it clearly and have really putting them really into experience mode, if I can say, to tell them here is how it will be working from A to Z, etc. It's not just it should not be theoretical or conceptual. It should be really like the real life process or workflow, as you've said, from A to what will be the output for that. So I remember that MDCG also created a guidance that explains also this concept here about looking at the data and then at the output and then connecting everything from A to Z. So you have to describe it, if I can say. So it's not just it should not be just a theory here.
Absolutely, yes. You need to even show screenshots, for example, of what the device output looks like. And it's also important to tell them what is the input, what is the software actually processing. For example, is it an X-ray image, or is it a DICOM series from a CT scanner, or is it an EEG waveform that it's assessing? So telling them what inputs it is taking in and what outputs it is generating, that's really important. And from a software point of view, words are obviously important to describe what it does, but it's also important to show in the submission, for example, if it's highlighting an area on an X-ray or a chest X-ray, show this is how this is what it actually does. This is what the highlighted area looks like. Or if it's generating a PDF report, for example, for a surgeon to review, then show that PDF report, and this is what the output of the device looks like. So showing all of these things is really going to make them understand how the software works, what data it processes, and what is the output of the software. And the key here is to make sure that the more information you give on these fundamental things, the less questions you will get back on these, what you think are basic things that they should know, but they probably don't if you don't tell them.
Exactly. And here, as we are talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, the point here is also maybe to explain to them how this artificial intelligence and machine learning will be working at the end. So there was a lot of discussion about will it take its decision alone, or should it be the practitioner, the physician that will review and then take the decision? Who is taking the decision at the end? Who is making the decision about the treatment, about the action, etc.? So all those decision points also are key for the regulator to understand if the machine learning or the artificial intelligence system will be autonomous, or if there will be somebody that will be backing that up and test or checking what the decision has been made. Hey, just a second. Do you need a EU, Swiss or UK representative? Then choose Easy Medical Device. We can represent you and also become your importer. Contact us at eo@easymedicaldevice.com.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this goes back to that human AI team that are constantly working together. There are things that the AI ML system is really good at doing, and then there are things that the clinician is really good at doing. So where do you have these handshakes, and where do you involve this human in the loop to make and approve any decisions that your AI ML system is making? So that interaction and where does that final decision making lie is really important from a regulatory point of view, because if you have a fully autonomous system, then the regulators are going to expect a lot more rigorous, verification, validation to prove that everything's working as it should.
Yeah, exactly. The second point that you mentioned is the risk around bias and training. So can you explain that?
Yeah. So obviously, machine learning systems are developed based on training data. So this is where humans train on a given piece of data set. Okay, these are the outputs, and these are the inputs, and the model actually learns. And when you feed the machine learning model these data sets, there can be inherent biases in these data sets. So it could be introduced by humans, or it could be introduced by the way data is sampled. So one of the biases, a negative bias, is a sampling bias, where you have underrepresented groups in your data set. And this is most of the time not done in an intentional or knowing way. But the end effect of this is that now the model is trained on a data set where certain groups are unrepresented, and that bias will not have the right outcomes when it's actually deployed into a real world setting. So these kinds of risks, essentially, from a machine learning point of view, is really important to consider in the risk management file. And there was a standard published by BSI and AMI. It's a consensus report, so it's not an international standard. It's BS-AMI CR 34971. Essentially, it's taking those ISO 14971 concepts that we're all familiar with and taking it to that machine learning level, and what kinds of hazards are there, and how do you mitigate and control them during the design and development process.
So the bias point here is that, as you've said, population is underrepresented, or so there are some maybe historical consideration that are also placed there. So what do you recommend? I mean, how the auditor or the regulator, if I can say, maybe can come and ask you, or what will he verify? What will be the points where he says, oh yes, here I see there is really a bias? Or I mean, do you have some hints or some tips maybe for people that will be try to really correct that?
Yeah, I think one of the ways is to have a large training data set where you ensure that all of the groups that you care about are represented equally. And these groups could be to do with sex, gender, age, weight, BMI, for example, skin color for certain types of devices, but also it could be to do with the types of CT scanners, or for example, or even models of CT scanners. Because if you have a training data set from just, let's say, one particular hospital where they have this model of CT scanner, and then that's all the model is trained on. Now, when you put it into a real world setting where now the model is going to be exposed to many more models and manufacturer of CT scanners, it may not perform as well as you think. So it really comes down to what is your intended use, and what are some important subgroups within this to ensure that there are no biases created. But usually a large training data set would mitigate a lot of these bias concerns.
So when we say bias, the idea also of this, I think, for the regulators, is not to hide this topic. If I can say, is
Correct.
to disclose the topic already, and to say, instead of saying nothing and waiting for the regulator maybe to come to us and tell us, oh, I see that there is a bias or something like that, maybe to you disclose that you have worked on the bias, and here is how you have prevented to have this issue, etc., etc. So this is mainly a good practice also, to not just hide it and really frontally, if I can say, discuss about it on your documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just typical risk management that we're used to. What things can go wrong with the device, and how do you control for it, and how do you even let your users know about some of these risks. So it's traditional risk management that we're used to, and telling the regulators that you were aware of this issue, these risks, and you put in some controls to mitigate them. And it's giving them confidence that, again, this is not airing your dirty laundry. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how you manage these risks as you developed your device.
So the training set data sets mainly should, when you say it should be large, is there a number of, if I can say, patients or people or data or things, or what means large? Is there a standard for this kind of thing, or is there something to say, oh, the large is that, or you should calculate that, or what how you will answer that?
I mean, I don't think there's a straight answer to this, but I've definitely seen, some recent clearances monitoring this AI ML software as a medical device database that the FDA maintains. Some of these devices are trained on millions of images. So a large could be millions of images, or it could be lower. I guess, this is where the data scientists in a company would need to come together and make a good, strong argument for what is large for their particular scenario and setting.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, don't stay just between regulators. Involve
Yeah,
some statisticians and some people that
yeah.
will help you to answer those questions. Okay, so now I have been training my data and validating the data. But now the question that some manufacturers may ask is, okay, I'm doing this training and validation, but against which standard? Should I create my own standard, or is there a
Mhm.
standard, or how the regulator will say, oh, what you have done validation wise is correct, while I have no kind of reference or have nothing where I can say, oh yes, here is the score I have in comparison to maybe others.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, when we talk about validation, I think this is one of the most commonly misused terms in the industry. There's so many types of validation. And when we talk about ML model validation, we're really talking about that clinical validation, that would be done as part of design validation, for example. So when it comes to this validation, this is where we are proving that the model is accurate, and it meets its intended purpose. If it's diagnosing something, that actually is able to do that. So one thing that's really important for validation is this reference standard. Your device may say, based on a particular image, that there's cancer or not, but how do you know whether this is actually true? It could be a false positive or a false negative. So this is where reference standards come in. Essentially, what they allow is comparison against your ML model outputs. So your ML model output may say something is positive or negative, and essentially your reference standards would have the actual truth or the ground truth of what the actual diagnosis is. So it again comes down to the context and the clinical setting for the device, but a reference standard could be biopsy, for example. If a device is diagnosing cancer, the only way to comprehensively prove whether there was cancer or not is through a biopsy and assessment of that sample in the lab. So reference standards can depend on the intended use and the area of your software, but it could be things like biopsy. It could also be opinions of experts. Sometimes people need to come together and maybe vote or have a consensus opinion on whether something is right or not.
So when we are talking about hardware devices, for example, when I want to do a biocompatibility testing or a
Yeah.
verification of that, I have the ISO 10993-1. When I
Mhm.
want to do a usability, I have the IEC 62366. When I want to do a risk management, I have the ISO 14971, etc. I have those methodologies. For this kind of validation, or if I want to do a validation for any types of AI, is it going through the traditional route like IEC 62304, or is there specific things to consider for AI in terms of validation and specific standards that maybe are existing or will exist, I don't know, on how to have a best practice, if I can say, on doing this type of validation?
I'm not aware of any medical device specific validation standards in this context. Recently, I was at a conference and I heard about a verification standard, being developed for AI ML systems so I think there's guidance around verification, but not so much around validation, specifically in the med device setting. So this is really where companies have to get their cross-functional teams together and really look at their specific device and its intended use and understand what is the reference standard. It could be, if you're going through a 510(k) pathway, you already have a predicate device who has, used a reference standard, and that already gives you some thoughts around what your reference standard could be. But in terms of standards currently available, I'm not aware of any.
So can we then be challenged by the regulators on notified bodies or FDA on the methodology or the validation way that we have used? Is this something that, as there is no guidance or no standard or no best practice, can we be challenged? And maybe if we go to this regulator, it will be fine. But if we go to another one, it will be like, oh, no, you have to prove me more, provide me more information.
Yeah. So one of the guidelines published by FDA around these good machine learning practices, it says that you need to select the best available reference. Now, obviously, that's a very subjective and broad term. So, it's just such a cornerstone of your validation. So making sure that you have this right would be something if you're targeting the US market, to actually go to the FDA and ask if your best available reference method is something they agree with, because a lot of time and resources are required to generate these reference data sets, and you want to make sure that you're doing it once and once and for all for your first submissions. You want to make sure that it's really airtight in terms of your approach.
Okay, great. The last point that you mentioned is the ability to perform well on new unseen data. So can you explain that?
Yeah, so this is talking about the concept of generalizability. Now, we talked previously, you could have millions of images that the ML model is trained on, but this is still in the training setting. This is still something you've done internally. But after you have your approval, your device will be used in unseen data that the model has never seen, and now it has to essentially react and go back to the things it has learned and the patterns it has recognized, and make the right associations in terms of whether there's a disease state or not a disease state. So really, generalizability is this model's ability to perform well on new and unseen data. If you have if your machine learning model was way too simple, that means you only, let's say, trained it on 10 sets of images, for example. Obviously, in a real world setting, no one would do this in their right mind, but to illustrate this in an extreme scenario, this would not really perform well because it hasn't gathered enough data to really make meaningful associations. But then also, if you have really complex models, the model may make associations that are not really important. So even noise, it may associate as meaningful data, and it gives you the wrong output. So generalizability is finding this sweet spot between your complexity of the model, but also when you put it out into the real world, it will actually make the right decisions that you expect to make on unseen data. And that's really the key test for a model in this validation. Can you actually prove that it works across everyone in the population that you care about? So whether it's different age groups or different types of ethnicities, or even we talked about different types of CT scanners or models of CT scanners, does it actually work equally well across all of those different subgroups? That's really important.
So as you said, we have the first phase, which is training, and then after the training, we say, okay, now let's go to the real world and capture data and see if it acts correctly. Again, on the training, as you've seen, this is data that the software will have seen once and learn
Right.
from it. Maybe to come back on the previous thing about training, those data, is there a bank of images, or should I go and on purpose open, for example, a clinical trial to obtain those data, those images, and obtain also maybe the answer about those images? Oh yeah, the fracture is here. So let's see now if the AI ML software can find it, etc. So is there a way also to get those data, or it's like no, you can just go on internet, you find a bank of images, and then you take this bank of images and then you use it as you want? So maybe
Yeah.
just to clarify this point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There are large, data sets available that are open source and publicly available for download. The problem with some of these data sets is sometimes they are restricted for use only for research and development activities, and maybe not for commercial activities. So there could be a licensing issue there. But even if you don't have a licensing issue there, you may have all of this data set, but you may not exactly have, because your software may only work on certain kinds of imaging protocols or certain types of criteria. So you may have to process them. You have to do some pre-processing just to make sure it is suitable for your device. So you could obviously find something that fits perfectly for your device, and you still have to make sure it's still suitable for your training, or you may have to pre-process them and make it suitable. Or if your device is really novel, then you may even have to generate some data yourself. But mostly in the imaging space, X-rays, CT scan images, these kinds of images are usually available in large banks that are publicly available for download.
And for making the validation, as we talked about, from the trend space to now going to the real world. So we talked before about the fact that the AI can be autonomous, or no, we have a monitoring done by a physician. So then here is the reason why for new data or unseen data, it's preferable to have somebody that is checking and then verifying, because we don't know, as he has never seen those data, maybe there is something that we missed during our validation. So it's better to have somebody to monitor that in case there is some issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to the post-market considerations, right? You want to make sure that once you deploy it, it's still performing within the specifications essentially that you think and you claim that it would. So it's really important that from a post-market point of view, you've got the right sort of mechanisms to detect these changes if they happen. And post-market monitoring is one of those key things that the likes of FDA really care about, because when you start putting your device on the market, now you are generating a lot more evidence in terms of what's happening in the real world. So that's really important. One of the problems that can happen with with machine learning devices in the post-market phase is something called a data set drift, and this is when the input data has different characteristics than what it was actually trained on. And this could happen due to genuine changes. For example, now there's a new technology that's available. For example, there's a newer model of a CT scanner, but this is not something your model was trained on. So when the input changes, obviously, then the model may not respond or perform that well when these characteristics change. For example, now the model is exposed to a completely different demographic of the population, or completely different types of disease presentations or risk factors that you did not think about. So all of these characteristics to do with the input data that can lead to this drift, and you can observe the performance changing. So it's really important that manufacturers in their PMCF plans, if you're in the sort of EU MDR space or in the FDA space, you have as part of your post-market surveillance plans, mechanisms to monitor, to trend these inputs and these data and make sure that they're still performing within the bounds that you expect it to.
So in the case, for example, that okay, your software was only for adults, and suddenly you have some kids. Mainly, you already mentioned that on the instruction flows or indication that no, it's only for adults. So then it's like off-label use, if I can say.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is where hopefully in the instructions, information for safety, the manufacturer has disclosed that this is not really meant to be used for a pediatric population. So I would say that's a slightly different sort of scenario in terms of, you rightly pointed out off-label use, but there are many other scenarios and use cases that are still within your claimed, an approved intended purpose, yet it's not quite what the model was developed for.
Okay, understood now. Okay, so I think we covered all the points that are tricky, if I can say, if you are submitting. So I hope it will be really helpful for the people. So normally, if we cover those 4 points, most likely we have a lot of chance to have our software that is kind of approved by the regulators.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the big ticket items that, a reviewer is definitely going to focus more on. So having made sure you think about this, in advance, it's really hard to address some of these, last minute, because they require a lot of time, a lot of resources, and many times, external people to coordinate. So it's making sure that it's built into your regulatory strategy, it's built into your VNB plan, and going in, you're fully well aware of what kinds of things are going to be expected from you. And that submission is, the last part that you just write, but it's really the thinking, the strategy, the collaboration, all of that going in together. That's what really gives you the success.
Great. So related to Vega, because you are working at Vega as a consultant, so can Vega help, if I can say, on all those topics if needed?
Yeah, absolutely. Vega is a life sciences consulting company, and our focus is specifically software. So in pharma, biotech, but also in medical devices. And so from a medical device compliance point of view, we help companies with their regulatory compliance. And it could be, as just helping them build a design history file, or helping them with their classification, or helping them with their internal audits, or sometimes even companies come and ask us to support in making their software development practices agile and per IEC 62304. So there's really a wide range of activities where we can support a lot of companies.
Great. So I'll put all your information on the show notes. And if you are coming, if people that are listening are coming to Basel in Switzerland, then they can also come to visit Vega. I mean, come and let's have a lunch together, and then we can also go to visit Vega. Okay. Thanks again, Richie. It was really helpful. A lot of information here. Just for information also for the audience, we are planning in October to have a conference called AI Act Summit, so in Strasbourg, France. So we are just waiting, if I can say, for the AI Act Summit, AI Act legislation to be published officially, because we are still waiting that to release the agenda. But yeah, we have a lot of great topics that will be discussed. We try to invite some notified bodies, some consultants, some people from the industry also to explain to us artificial intelligence. So yeah, stay tuned, and maybe you'll I will meet you also there in October to discuss about artificial intelligence and everything. Okay, so Richie, it was really a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much again, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you so much, Monique. Thanks for having me once again.